Good morning and happy Christmas. It's just 5 days until the country expects to be coming together with our loved ones, exchanging gifts and eating far too much in a spirit of jollity and togetherness. Or so we hope. Already, big family Christmas ambitions have been scaled back as we were all advised to have smaller gatherings. Still, more are limiting their interactions and cancelling social engagements this week to avoid catching COVID over the next 5 days. Much to the detriment of the hospitality industry, that is. And now the prospect of formal restriction is again rearing its ugly head. Yet for the literally hundreds of thousands who have caught COVID in the last few days, a Christmas lockdown is already their reality. 10 days of quarantine now takes us to the 30th of December. There'll not be much festive celebration in isolation. So sorry to bring a dose of pessimism this Monday morning, but frankly the data does not look good. Just about anyone in Britain under the age of 35 will know how half their friends have come down with Omicron in the last week alone. This thing is seriously infectious. And the issue with that, the issue with so many of my generation being infected now, as I myself was 2 weeks ago, is that events like Christmas present the perfect opportunity for this super infectious strain of virus to jump from millennials to the vulnerable. The overwhelming majority will be fine, but here's the rub. This virus is so infectious that even if it is significantly milder than Delta, even if a much smaller fraction of those who are infected end up in hospital, if all the vulnerable people in the country are exposed to it on one weekend, and a small fraction of those need medical treatment at the same time, that poses a significant risk to the NHS. This is about timing. Don't get me wrong, everyone will likely catch Omicron at some stage over the next few months. The question is, how can we avoid everyone, especially the vulnerable, getting it at exactly the same time? How can we keep the NHS from being too swamped to treat people not just for COVID, but for other illnesses too? Now, government scientists are reportedly almost uniformly urging formal restrictions on our lives. Yet we hear this morning that the Cabinet is in open revolt against scientists. Some arguments from the Cabinet are very legitimate. The question of how much public consent really exists for onerous restrictions. After almost 2 years of government yo-yoing with our liberties, even the most cautious commentators are now questioning how much longer this can go on. A recent YouGov survey revealed broad opposition to stringent lockdown measures. Additionally, there's the question of proportionality. Restrictions have costs. Whatever is decided should always be the minimum necessary to prevent a genuinely overwhelmed health system. Too often, officials take the maximalist approach. And then there's the question of trust. The government told us we were on a one-way path to freedom over the summer. That's already been picked away at. And the front page of the Guardian newspaper this morning has photographic evidence of those in No.10 flouting the rules they themselves set. Why would the British public follow restrictions that No.10 itself took liberties with, even in the first lockdown? It's a serious point. Clearly, advisers applied their own discretion to their own rules last year. So why shouldn't the rest of us do so now? Yet one Cabinet argument that does not hold water is wait and see for more data. We simply do not have time to wait and see. By the time we've waited for fuller data, it would be too late to act. That is the nature of this incredibly infectious virus. It's hard to overstate how much of a difficult time this is to be sat in the hot seat, to be making those decisions. Yet this morning we hear that several options are being weighed up by ministers. The Telegraph is reporting that Boris Johnson is considering 3 broad options. First, advice to families to limit indoor mixing over the Christmas period. Note, this would be not legally binding. Second, restrictions on indoor mixing, social distancing and an 8 p.m. curfew on pubs and restaurants. And third, a full firebreak lockdown. Now, this is an interesting set of options, and I have to say good luck with getting a firebreak lockdown past the Tory party. That option is simply not feasible politically, nor should it be. It would be a kamikaze move for this Prime Minister. Equally, the idea of an 8 p.m. curfew strikes me as bonkers. Have we not learned from last winter? Cramming people into the same space over a shorter period of time is frankly nuts. It creates a corona-friendly exit time rush. Many of these restrictions would be unjustifiable. But we have to recognise there is a sliding scale of difference between advice, restriction and lockdown. Lockdown is clearly unconscionable, but fresh, frank advice, particularly to the most vulnerable, that could be very welcome indeed. For what it's worth, I'm resigned to the fact that this will not be a normal Christmas. I'll not be seeing as many family members this year as was the pre-corona norm. But once we're past the danger point of all the vulnerable people catching this disease at the same time on the same weekend, we can afford to be a lot more normal. The challenge is communicating that fact. And beyond COVID restrictions, one family will be having a less jolly festive season, even than those in isolation. That is, of course, the rapidly expanding Johnson clan. Rocked by an own goal instigated crash in the polls, a 100-strong backbench rebellion, a seismic by-election loss, and now the resignation of the second most popular member of his cabinet, the Prime Minister is in trouble. Probably the most trouble he has been at any point in his premiership. For months now, Tory MPs have been telling the Prime Minister to get a grip. Yet now this seems a much more urgent demand. It's clear this government needs to change to survive, not just on competence, but as Lord Frost demonstrated, also on ideology, conviction and political direction. Boris will continue to lose friends if he continues to U-turn, raise taxes and avoid radical regulatory reform. In short, how much longer does this Prime Minister have if he continues to squander his historic majority?